So we've been talking about the flow of the game with Godtear and how understanding that Godtear has multiple ways to score each round. You can go all killy. You could go all slayer. You could also explore area denial, buffs, taking out followers, capitalizing on God tiers, utilizing and understanding that the tiers are both objectives and terrain and that they change. So an interesting duality of not only having your own play style, we all have our own play style, but being able to build multiple combinations of warbands to fit that play style. So it's almost like infinite combinations. It's something that one of many things that I've enjoyed just tinkering with, just playing with Godtear and having that refreshing injection based on other skirmish war games that I really enjoy. And on a side note, if you've been thinking about jumping into Godtear, absolutely. The salty tears of the gods are waiting for you to drink. And I've pushed up to my channel here under the Godtear playlist, different ideas, different reviews, tactics, and exploring it. So one of the other aspects that I really love is that the game can be customized to fight 1, 2, or 3 warbands per player. It can operate out of that. Now, it's not quite in the rules, but if you've been following my channel, you know my number one rule, the Golden Fritz rule: everyone has a place at my table. So if I'm set up to play and you walk in and you say, hey, that game looks good, let's play a game. But I only have 30 minutes before I have to go. Okay, you have 30 minutes. We're burning minutes here. Let's do it. Just as a way to meet new friends, as a way to share the enthusiasm of the game, and as a way to say, hey, you know what? The community has been great to me over the years. Maybe I can help with the community and bring in some new players. So I love games that can scale from that perspective. With Godtear, we've played bigger and greater warbands. We've taken 2 or 3 tables, boards, put them together, had multiple players controlling a single warband on each side, and of course, having the same, but even playing with different missions based on that. And the rules, there's a couple of things we had to figure out along the way, but the rules adapted really, really well. So that, on a side note, pointed out to the robust mechanics DNA of this system, where we just put on such a heavy load to play it, not as intended. I mean, certainly capable of doing it, and it just performed flawlessly. And a couple of players were like, I really love this Godtear thing. Let's get like multiple warbands on the table. I mean, really, really exciting and amazing. But going back to scale 1, 2, or 3, I enjoy this, first of all, for the tactical flexibility. And that's what we're going to explore and build this checklist. But also the fact that the game plays, if I've got 35, 40 minutes to play, I do 1 warband. If I just want to try something out, have some fun, I do 1 warband. If I want kind of a balance of combos and strategy, but still plays pretty fast, I do 2 warbands. If I want the full experience of multiple warbands, look, you can never have too many toys on the table, right? And I want to have interlocking buffs and synergies, and I've got a few hours to really drink those tiers, then okay, let's do 3 warbands. Or do both. We play 3 warbands, and we've got 40 minutes before the club closes. Quickly, random draw, let's do 1 warband. So I appreciate that when they designed it, the idea was to scale. It's not just, well, look, you need 4 hours to play this, and if you don't have 4 hours, the game's going to be cut short. Life has ebb and flow. But in exploring that, there are certain tactical changes, things to keep in mind. And it's not that it's impossible to win with the different combinations of warbands, but it becomes a little bit more challenging, a little bit more of a learning curve. So let's look at 1 versus 1. I'm going to be grouping the colors a little bit differently, the focus of the champions. For this, think of reds and yellows as offensive. Reds wanting to beat up on other champions, yellows wanting to beat up on followers. They have buffs, they have supports, but they kind of go out there and kill things. Second, we have the other 2 categories of the blues and the greens. They're more support. Now, blue has some fighting ability and has some support, this terminology for the new players. And greens, while they have some offensive capability, they have a lot of buffs, both back and forth. So in a 1-player warband, your entire synergy is twofold. The actual warband itself, what it has, In Godtear, Warbands can pass buffs and interact with other Warbands on their team. They're all going for the Godtears, but for now, we have a temporary, if not shaky, alliance. And when you explore that, this cross synergy is important. You put down one Warband, it plays fast. That's all I have. So what becomes very, very important, naturally, this is going to favor aggressive Warbands like Reds and Yellows. So you're going to have Rangosh, you're going to have Jean. That's going to be easier to play. I did do Shale versus Rangosh, and Shale was Shale's one of my favorites, so it's not an easy, it's not a hard sell, but yes, that was a much more challenging game because while Landslide, that's like the giant God-tier construct that Shale controls, it's got some bite, but it's more of a buff. It's more of a bodyguard type thing. So that was a little bit harder. What you have to rely on, your synergy, is the actual mission itself. That's the synergy I want to interact with one Warband. So the introductory mission, life, the tiers are there and they are granting life. So at the end of every turn, the player that lost rolls one of the tier dice and adds a number of objective hexes that they can connect to others. Now this gets really interesting because with this game, Godtear, and this was something new for me. It took me a little while to wrap this around. Brilliant in terms of design, looking and saying the tiers themselves are objectives we're going to fight over, but they are also terrain. In many wargaming systems, terrain blocks line of sight. You can't really interact with terrain, or maybe you can. Godtear, the tiers themselves radiate godlike power. So the general followers, with the exception of a few rules, warbands that break it, the followers can't cross onto that. It's just too much magical power, raw power. But the champions, being infused with the salty tiers, naturally they can. So what you see is you're playing one warband. Not only all you have is the warband, but how you interact with the tiers is so viable. I mean, it's viable in a 2-player game or a 3-team game, but absolutely so viable because all I have is my followers. So blocking followers is an important tactic, one warband versus one warband, especially if you have a ranged warband and I can kind of get that advantage and block things. So one warband, however I go in, I'm 100% focusing on the tiers. And again, not that I'm not focusing on it, but the weight changes up and down. Okay, 2 warbands. Now we've got some synergy. Now we've got to make some interesting decisions, some interesting choices. And I love that the game forces you to decide, forces you to commit to these decisions as opposed to other gaming systems where it's like, I just roll a bunch of dice and stuff happens. So I just need to break through that dice chain. So just load up on dice and that's the tactics. I find in 2 warbands, you either double down on the obvious. So I take 2 reds or a red and a yellow or 2 yellows, double down on the killie. It works. Or now we can get some interesting synergy, a different style of play. Focus on one killie warband, so 1 yellow, 1 red, and 1 support warband. And again, that's not to say that the champions of the support warbands don't have bite, can attack. They do, but they also have some sub-powers to be able to cast stuff out. Now, this becomes interesting because if you go for the 1-in-1 combo, which personally my play style, that's what I enjoy. I love buffs. I love tricknology. I love doing crazy stuff on the table. I love where if I can get all of my pieces into position flawlessly, perfectly, and then I throw out some buffs, like the chain just descends and it's just beautiful on the table. Making that happen is the challenging point. Making that happen is the interesting point from that perspective. But in exploring that, looking and saying, okay, if I take one that can attack and I take one that can buff, when we're not in three war bands each or more than 3, it can be challenging to counter the buffs. I buff you, you debuff me. You throw out some debuffs, I throw out some buffs. This back and forth exchange becomes a little bit more challenging. Can you counter it as the other player? If I'm playing that, can I really put down that? Now you could go to support groups. I find that the lower tier a little bit harder to play. Again, not impossible, by no means impossible, but much more challenging just because now there are 2 on the table. And if you don't have a little bit of raw attack power, that a couple of missteps could put you in an interesting spot. So now when we jump to 3 versus 3, and this is kind of the default mode of the game, when you do 3 versus 3, this is where Godtear shines, because everything is important. Understanding the manipulation of the tiers, understanding the timing of when to kill stuff based on the turn to earn you points. It is a skirmish-based game. Killing is important, but you can't just go in killing everything. There's a certain poetry to it. There's a certain art form to it. 3 warbands means you can focus a little bit on everything. You could focus and say, now I want killy, but still have some buffs. All play styles, absolute all play styles are on the table. It's just going to take some time to really be able to see the deep combos of this game and the deep synergies of this game. And of course, first learning how to leverage them, but then also realizing, look, I can't, my opponent can't let me get these buffs off, these combos off, these super killy power moves off. I get it. I understand it. They've got to bring the hate to me. They got to bring and stop it and shut it down. So now we've got like a contest of the minds, like a staring contest. Who blinks first? I'm going to try and pull off my crazy tricknology. You're going to try and stop it. Can I counter what's going to be stopped? So a lot back and forth, changing turn by turn. So wanted to push this up to the archive to show that the game has been designed to play at multiple levels, not only for time and skill level, but also for what you're feeling in the moment. And also how just having this feeling that everyone has a place at the table, we've deliberately tried to break the game. We've deliberately throw down multiple warbands, an entire battlefield. It's like Godtears, more like God comets smashed down across these boards and just having a massive free-for-all. We did have to use some colored rings. We pulled some rings that fit from other board gaming systems because we needed to know, just like, look, we're mixing things up by turn 2. Like, who's controlling what? I mean, it was glorious. It was really wonderful. I really appreciate that the game can play not as intended and not just collapse under the raw weight of the Godtears on the table.